Today on CityCast Denver, billionaires are trying to steal our elections, is what many leading Democrats and Republicans are saying about a new initiative led by former DaVita CEO Kent Thiry. He and other local election reform advocates are currently trying to collect your signature to get on the November ballot. Thiry himself has already given $1 million to the campaign, so today I'm sitting down with him and former director of Denver elections, Amber McReynolds, to understand what they think is so broken about our elections and how they want to fix it. Today's Wednesday, July 10th. I'm Paul Caroli, and here's what Denver's talking about. Kent Thiry and Amber McReynolds, welcome to CityCast Denver.
It's great to be here.
Thank you very much.
So, Kent, you're pushing your fifth major election reform in 10 years, maybe the biggest one yet. What is so bad about the way we currently do our elections?
This one is about our continuing efforts to refresh and restore our democracy. And in this particular case, what happens right now is so many Colorado voters don't get to cast a meaningful vote because of how the system works. And the far left and the far right end up having disproportionate influence. And they certainly deserve their proportionate influence, but not disproportionate. So this is about trying to give every Coloradan a meaningful vote and the power of the primaries in particular back to the people instead of the parties.
All right, so let's talk about how you all want to do that. The reforms you're pushing now, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that there's two main things bundled together as Initiative 310. Y'all are collecting signatures right now, and they're going to appear on the November ballot if you get enough signatures. And it's two things. One would implement quote unquote open primaries, and one would give us ranked choice voting, which I think some listeners might be familiar with and some listeners might not be. So Amber, you're one of the country's leading elections experts, former head of Denver elections here. Can you explain to us how this new process would work?
Yeah, so the largest part of the reform is the open primary. That's the most significant change that we are making. And what we're saying is the federal offices down to most of the state office.
That's like governor, congressperson, senator.
Yep, and then state senate, state representative. For those offices, instead of there being a separate Democratic ballot and a separate Republican ballot, and then also a separate process for minor parties, and then also a separate process for unaffiliated candidates, we're basically saying everyone has to go through the primary, and you can petition on, or you can go through the normal party caucus or nominating process to gain access to the ballot. And so all candidates will appear on that one ballot, regardless of party affiliation, in step one.
Okay.
And then the second phase is advancing the top four candidates from each of those races to then the general election. Then we will use a ranking system that allows voters now to basically expand their choices so that you'll be able to rank your candidates in the order that you prefer them. So 1, 2, 3, 4. So we're expanding your options as a voter to go from beyond voting for one to ranking all four of those in a second round, which is the general election.
So in the primary, I would vote for one person.
Correct.
My top pick. And then in November, I would get a ballot that looks kind of like a spreadsheet. And I would say, like, this person's my top preference, that person's my second preference. And then some sort of magic happens in the tabulation that it then reflects the general will of the voters.
It's even simpler than a spreadsheet.
Okay.
Really, you'd see a matrix that has a column for your first choice, second, third, fourth, with bubbles. No different than the way we rank things in our everyday lives, whether it's our food preferences or our sports teams or whatever that might be. We've seen around the country that where this has been implemented, New York City is a good example. 95% of voters found it simple. So it's very straightforward in terms of the ranking piece. In terms of the counting piece, we are not doing anything to change the way ballots are handled, processed, and counted. So a paper ballot is still scanned or hand counted. The part that's going to change is the way the results are tallied.
How do we pick a winner under this system?
Basically, the way that plurality works right now is we're counting every one of those bubbles, one for each of the ballots that we count. Now we're going to get more data from the voter. So instead of just getting one mark, we're going to get a ranking. So what that means is that the voters are telling us actually more information about what they think about all the candidates. And then the way that it works is when you run what we call a round one, whoever's in the fourth place spot,
Right.
they get marked off, and then their second place choices are distributed amongst those top three candidates. And you go through that process until someone reaches a 50% majority, and then they would be declared the winner. Correct.
Okay. So I guess I do understand how when the ballot actually shows up, all I have to do is rank my preferences, and then all that hard math stuff that someone else does that. The experts do that. But then I guess the other thing that I'm concerned about, that I think a lot of people are concerned about with this proposal, is the more abstract level of like anytime you make a change to the way elections work, there are winners and there are losers. Why is this better, Kent?
I think this is better because it'll give a much higher percentage of Coloradans a meaningful vote. And it's for a number of reasons. I'll give one example. In the last presidential cycle, you might have had people who they preferred Pete Buttigieg or Amy Klobuchar, but they said, gosh, they're kind of long shots, and Joe Biden is my second choice. But do I choose the one I really want, or am I worried that's wasting my vote? And so I'm going to have to play it safe with Biden. Well, now you get to vote for both. And so that if you prefer Amy Klobuchar, you vote for her. But then you put Joe Biden as number two. So if no one gets a majority in that first round, your vote will still count, and your second place choice will count. In addition, this process eliminates the spoiler thing, which has become a science for both parties. So what you often have is the Republicans will go ahead and promote an environmental candidate on the Democratic side to get 4 or 5% of the vote. And that could be enough to allow the Republican to defeat the Democrat. And this happened in our congressional districts just last year, that a person from one party beat a person from the other party only because there was a spoiler, in that case, a libertarian candidate who peeled off some of the vote. So this spoiling has become a science where both parties do it. And so there's all these kind of situations. And maybe I'll do one more if you'll allow me. Just to give a real world example.
I think it's helpful.
There are 35 state Senate districts in Colorado. 31 at this point are party safe. They're almost certainly D or R. So in 31 out of 35 state Senate districts, the primary is the general now. And turnout is far less than half of what we're so proud of in the general. In those 31 districts that are party safe, in 25 of them, this last cycle, just 9 months ago, in 25 of those 31, there was really only one candidate on the ballot with any chance of winning. That means only 13% of Colorado voters last year got to cast a meaningful vote for state legislature. Everybody else was looking at a single name that was going to get 60, 70, 80% of the vote from a single party. And so if you ended up 100 years ago trying to design a democracy and you said, let's design one where only 13% of the people have a meaningful vote, you would have been laughed out of the room.
Yeah, it's very interesting to look at some of these situations because I'm thinking about the primaries we just had here for the congressional seat to represent District 1, so to represent Denver. There was only one candidate on the Democratic ticket, Diana DeGette, and one candidate on the Republican side, Valdemar Archuleta. But I don't think it would have changed the outcome for either of those if there was open primaries. I think those two candidates would still have advanced to November, and I think Diana DeGette will still have won in a landslide. Are there any races that might be like recent in people's minds here in Colorado that you think the outcomes would have been different under this system?
Well, first off, you mentioned the recent primary, which was a historic low. 26% of voters in Colorado participated. Mm-hmm. For instance, in Boebert's district, she's actually going to win a congressional seat. That's a safe seat. She's the likely winner in November. And she got less than 10% of the electorate in her district.
In her primary.
Choose her in her primary. And that essentially is the general election because that district is considered one of the safe seats, right?
Yeah, because it's a heavily Republican district. We're talking about Congressional
Correct.
District 4 out on the Eastern Plains.
Correct. And so in our method, it would have been all candidates on the same ballot. Likely she would have advanced, but 2, possibly even 3 other Republicans might have advanced. So the general election would have been 4 people, likely a few from her race, possibly a Democrat, possibly even an independent if they chose to run. But there would have been 4 options for the general election for the electorate to choose from, which could have been multiple Republicans. I mean, this all, the initiative itself is not picking winners and losers. It's saying voters need more choices and therefore more voices. And we're trying to expand the option voters have in the general election by advancing more options out of the primary so that people are more fairly represented.
Paul, could I go ahead and add on
Please.
two points? One is that it is not our intention, or not our objective to change who gets elected in many cases. It's to allow them to govern, allow them to cross the aisle and compromise and not fear being primaried from the far left or far right. And so the number of legislators who've grabbed Amber I by the elbow and said, I can't say this publicly because my party would be very unhappy, but I hope you win because I'd like to cross the aisle and govern. Right now, I can't because I'll pay a price when that 14% show up in the next primary. They tend to skew far left and far right. And unfortunately, that's the filter I need to win my way through.
So the subtle differences. I think I understand what you're saying. You're saying this is a system that would incentivize candidates to be more bipartisan, to appeal more to the middle. And then in the next election, they don't have to worry so much about the far left or far right of their party, but more about the center and the moderates.
Exactly. And for us, it's not about being moderate. Teddy Kennedy was very liberal. Orrin Hatch was very conservative. Both of them had a long-standing history of crossing the aisle and getting stuff done when compromise was essential to getting stuff done. So for us, it's not a moderate thing. There's going to be some very liberal people, some very conservative. We want to liberate those people to govern.
Well, although you have to admit, though, that a moderate candidate with moderate positions will have an easier time doing those compromises with moderates on the other side. Like, undoubtedly, this is a system that favors moderates. We have to accept that as table stakes.
If that is what the district is in terms of its membership. A liberal district is going to elect a liberal. A conservative district is going to elect a conservative. And a mixed district will be more likely to come out with a moderate because that is what the weighted average reality is of their voting population.
This is not really about changing what districts choose to do. It's about empowering voters with more choices within the districts that they live in so that they can actually have a meaningful vote in the process.
Want to know one of my favorite sounds? Here it is. That's the sound I hear when I'm learning Spanish with Babbel. And if you want to learn a new language this year, I guarantee it'll be one of your favorite sounds too. I'm David Plotz. I'm the CEO of CityCast, and I've been doing Babbel for a few weeks, and it's been so much fun. This week, I've been learning lots of food vocabulary and how to order in a restaurant. This is one of the things I love about Babbel, is that it's about learning the language so that you can use it. As Babbel says, it's designed by real people for real conversation. So it's all based on real life situations. And these restaurant lessons are awesome. When I went to Mexico City last year with my girlfriend, I was mute. But next time, I'm going to be ordering the sopes and las salsas picantes. Babbel has over 16 million subscriptions sold, plus all of Babbel's 14 award-winning language courses are backed by their 20-day money-back guarantee. Here's a special limited-time deal for CityCast listeners. Right now, get up to 60% off your Babbel subscription, but only for CityCast listeners at babbel.com/CityCast. Get up to 60% off at babbel.com/CityCast. Spelled BABBEL.com/CityCast. Rules and restrictions may apply.
This episode is brought to you by Fox Restaurant Concepts. Because Blanco Cocina and Cantina is serving up Sonoran-style Mexican food, margaritas, and good times daily at 9th and Colorado. But Blanco is more than your typical Mexican restaurant. It's an escape from the ordinary, a happy hour hangout, a place to sit back, recharge, and party. Blanco opens at 11 a.m. every day, but the happy hour is where it's at. Hit up Blanco between 2 and 5 p.m. Monday through Friday and all day Tuesday for killer deals, including their all-new summer special. That's a whole pitcher of classic margaritas and a plate of nachos con queso blanco for just $25. You can dine in or take out for lunch, dinner, and weekend brunch. I mean, I'm all about the ambiance in this place. It does look like a vacation. View the menu, make reservations, and order online at BlancoCocinaCantina.com. That's BlancoCocinaCantina.com. This episode is brought to you by Denver Botanic Gardens Chatfield Farms. Because it's time for the garden's annual Lavender Festival. Coming up on the weekend of July 20th, from 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. Saturday and Sunday, you can immerse yourself in more than 2,000 lavender plants at Chatfield Farms Lavender Garden. It's a family-friendly celebration of all things lavender, with live music, local artisans and lavender products, and demos in the blacksmith shop and dye garden. I mean, I bet you could get lavender soaps, lavender lotions, lavender candles. Fresh lavender candles, you can't beat that. Like a fresh made one. I'm also curious about what they do in the dye garden. That sounds awesome. And if you've never been to the Botanic Gardens at Chatfield Farms, you've got to go. It's right off C470 and Wadsworth Boulevard in Littleton. They'll have plenty of food and drink vendors, as well as barrel train rides, lawn games, and crafts for the kids. Tickets must be purchased in advance at botanicgardens.org. That's botanicgardens.org to purchase your tickets for the Lavender Festival today.
We have to move on to some of the criticism that you all have faced for this because it has been controversial, this proposal. There's a lot of entrenched interests in our current system. And some of those are the political parties themselves, and they seem to be pretty upset with you two. So a quote from Shad Murab, chair of the Colorado Democrats, he recently told Colorado Public Radio that, quote, billionaires are trying to rig Colorado's elections to stifle the voice of everyday Coloradans by tossing a hand grenade into our democracy. Ken, I want you to respond to that. But first, are you a billionaire?
First, I don't feel like publicly commenting on my net worth. I've been very fortunate in my life. And at this stage of my life, I'm focused on giving back my money to help the world by improving our democracy and working on our environment and education for low-income kids. And as to the criticism from both parties, in 2016, when I led the initiative to semi-open the primaries, because before then they were totally closed, we got them halfway open in 2016, and we required a presidential primary. Both parties opposed us. Now, if you tried to take that away from Coloradans, the right to pick a D or an R ballot or the right to vote in a presidential primary, you'd be pilloried. Mm-hmm. But both parties were against us. In 2018, when I led the gerrymandering effort at the federal and state level, two different initiatives, both parties started out in opposition. And it was only once we built an incredible coalition of people, of citizens, that in the end, they ended up going along with it, which was 180 degrees different from where they started. So we've gone through this before. The parties don't like it because right now they have tremendous control over who gets to run. Who is that one person in 80% of the districts who is going to be the obvious winner? Right now, they control that in so many cases. And if I had that power, I'd probably want to keep it too. People with power use power to keep power. We're trying to give power back to the people. And so we're not surprised by these criticisms because we are reducing their power and giving it back to the people. And I empathize with their reticence.
So we do have to talk about your motives a little bit, actually, because back in 2017, after this first round of reforms that you got through, you explored a run for governor as a moderate. I want to know, do you still have ambitions for the governor's office?
No.
Are you ready to commit to that for good? Because I think people would want to know before they vote on this proposal.
Correct. I'm not going to run for governor ever.
All right. How about your party affiliation? Are you Republican or unaffiliated right now?
I've been an independent most of my adult life. I've spent some time on the D side. I've spent some time on the R side. But probably 80% of the last 40 years, I have been an independent. So it's my natural habitat. And that's across multiple different states that I've lived in.
Amber, I want to ask you a question about the logistics, because that's your specialty. We were talking earlier about how you helped lead the mail-in ballot changeover that Colorado is now very proud of. You've gotten some pushback for this proposal because folks say it'd be confusing or hard to implement. What do you say to those things?
Well, those same criticisms actually came about in 2013 when we passed a far greater change, implementing proactive mail balloting, implementing same-day registration, implementing vote centers, implementing proactive address changes, also automated voter registration. We did a lot in that package of reforms, far greater than this type of system reform. And we had a lot of people that said it won't work and it's too soon and it's too quick. And we actually implemented that model in a coordinated election within 6 months of the bill signing. And within a year, midterm election in 2014 was implemented. And it was hard to change a lot of systems, but the county clerks came together. They're all super talented and super effective. And it's now become a national model. California followed us, Utah followed us. I could go down the list of states that have now adopted what we did. So we're not changing any of those elements. We're taking the gold standard and moving it to be a platinum model.
So connected to the confusion complaint, something that I hear more in this conversation is less about confusion and more about consistency, because I think that change itself is destabilizing, or at least it can be. And after the changeover to mail-in ballots, I mean, we've heard from mostly Republican candidates. Trump, for example, has said this a lot, but they hate this mail-in system. And it seems like the change itself has opened this opportunity for an attack. I wonder if you all are worried about too much change too fast at a time when our democracy itself is so vulnerable.
What I would say is, if you want to achieve stability by getting a 26% turnout in your elections, that's one thing. It's not the way to achieve a healthy democracy. At this point, Generation Z, I just saw this recent survey, and it just is the same as so many others. 85% don't think either party represents them. So if you achieve stability by having something that's non-representative, unfair, and dominated by a small number of people within a professional party, then have at it. We've got that.
All right, so we've been talking a little bit about fairness and a little bit about your motives, Kent, but you brought up Gen Z, and I wanted to ask you about a report that I saw after the primary we just had in June that said that you donated more than $1 million to the efforts to unseat progressive candidates here in Colorado, including here in Denver, Elizabeth Epps and Tim Hernandez. I don't think anyone would call them moderate candidates. I wonder, was that fair?
Well, I think absolutely fair and consistent with the spirit of our democracy. What I personally decided in making the investment in 7 Democrats and 5 Republicans, so very nonpartisan, but every one of those 12 people was known for civil behavior, a willingness to consider bipartisan solutions, and were people who were willing to represent all voters in the district, not relegate those folks from the other party to a world of no representation forever because they're the minority party forever, but to pay some attention. And so I think it was great for a lot of people, not just myself, to step up and speak up for the majority in the middle, the people who don't mind liberal versus conservative, but want people who are willing to cross the aisle. Again, it's not about being moderate. It's about being reasonable, common sense oriented. And immigration, you can have people with very liberal views, very conservative views. Our country needs to have a coherent policy somewhere in the middle. Well, that's the kind of candidate we want to support. We are not trying to skew things for everybody who lives in the middle. We want people who are willing to meet in the middle sometimes with their opponents when the alternative is very bad for the state of the country.
So what do you say to a Tim Hernandez voter who doesn't want elected official to represent them, to compromise, who wants someone to stand up for their values that happen to be different than your values, that maybe says, this didn't feel fair to me, I don't trust this guy, I don't trust this reform? How would you convince them?
Well, there are going to be some people who vote in any given candidate race or any different issue. There are going to be people who disagree. The important thing for democracy, in a world where it's not ever going to be the case where everybody agrees, it's a world where you want constructive adult engagement and some reasonable listening and some reasonable compromising. But boy, if the progressives on an issue have a majority of the vote, then they deserve to have that position manifest itself. If there's another district where a majority is conservative and that's their position, they deserve to have their principles and their values made manifest in the policy. So as Amber said, it really differs district by district, but this is not about excluding liberals and conservatives. Quite the opposite. It's allowing them to govern.
Kent, I have to ask you about something that I don't know if it's related, but I don't know if I'll ever get another opportunity to do this. I saw an episode of John Oliver's show a few years ago about your work at DaVita, the company where you used to be the CEO. And he showed some footage of you riding a horse on a stage wearing a Three Musketeers costume. And he talked about how this has been a lifelong fascination of yours, this time period in history. I don't know if I've ever seen you respond to that or explain that. What is it about the Three Musketeers?
I don't have a lifelong fascination with Three Musketeers.
Oh, okay.
So, but at DaVita, where we had 75,000 teammates, and an unusually healthy and constructive and engaged culture, according to all sorts of third-party sources. We believed in having fun. Our caregivers worked so hard to take care of our sick patients every single week for years because we dealt with chronically ill populations who were at serious risk of death. And so we believed in fun as a company, and that included sometimes wearing costumes and doing skits and things like that. And it was a great way for people to relax, have fun with each other, and then go back into the clinics the next day and take good care of human beings.
So this wasn't like, there's no ideological connection between like that period in French history and like the current election reforms?
No, the original context was just that the Musketeers were famous. The reason people have heard of them is they were famous for their loyalty to their country and to each other. That's why people wrote the books. That's why people then did movies. So there's a reason why they've had that brand. And at DaVita, we aspired as a company, but considered ourselves to be a community first and a company second, that we wanted to demonstrate similar loyalty to our mission and loyalty to each other. And so that was the conceptual linkage, not any sort of deep knowledge of French society during that time, but a real intense belief in loyalty to our mission and loyalty to each other. And so we wanted to recapture the fervency that ostensibly, or by reputation, the Musketeers had, just like many other groups in society who have distinctive cultures, missions, and people who have expectations of each other, but also have each other's back.
Okay. I appreciate that. One last question. Denverites are going to be asked for their signature this month to get this measure that we've been talking about on the ballot in November. Why should they sign?
Well, first, we should be continuously improving our democracy. And I've worked my whole life, now over 20 years, in the civic space and in the nonprofit space and in government to do just that, to continue to improve the voting process, the voting experience for all that want to cast a vote and make sure they can cast a vote. And I think this is another advancement for Colorado. We have done so many incredible advancements, all the way back to being the first state to pass women's suffrage on the ballot. We were the first state 25 years ahead of the 19th Amendment passing. You fast forward and you look at all that we've done to build an incredible system for voters. This is yet another step to continue that mission of providing that fairness and that freedom in the voting process that so deeply matters, whether you're on the right, on the left, in the middle, wherever you might be. Freedom and fairness in the voting process is core to what our nation was founded upon and core to having a strong democracy.
I personally, at this stage of my life, no longer being a CEO, thought I'd be focusing on the environment and on education for low-income kids. That's what I started focusing on with my time and treasure. And then I realized that no amount of philanthropy and effort can make up for a dysfunctional democracy with respect to those two issues. And so I came to it as a derivative of being focused on two big other issues and then saying, gosh, we can't get to the promised land until we give the power back to the people. The good news in all this is that the American people are not nearly as polarized as American legislatures. And that's why we by giving voice back to the people, we can make some stunning progress. And we have two principles that it turns out about 80% of Americans agree with. One is that every eligible American voter should get to vote for whoever they want. Democratic, Republican, Libertarian, but every American voter in a taxpayer-funded election should get to vote for whoever the heck they want with no party telling them they can't vote. And second, in order to become an elected official in America, earn a majority of the vote. So those are our two sacred principles which lead us down the policy path that we're on, and those are the reasons why these Denver citizens should be inclined to join the movement.
Well, Kent Thiry, Amber McReynolds, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you so much for putting a spotlight on this issue. We really appreciate it.
Kent Thiry, Amber McReynolds, and Initiative 310 still have a long way to go before Colorado voters receive a ranked choice ballot. Even if they can collect 125,000 signatures by the first week of August and win over a majority in November, a last-minute amendment passed in the legislature back in June could delay implementation of their proposed changes indefinitely. Denver's own state representative, Emily Sirota, proposed the amendment and seems to oppose 310. So we've reached out to hear her side of the story. In the meantime, I would love to hear from you. What do you think about open primaries and ranked choice voting? Should Colorado lead again on election reform? The Democracy Hotline is open. Leave us a voicemail with your name and neighborhood, or send us a text to 720-500-5418, and you might hear your take on the show. Again, that number is 720-500-5418. That's all for today here on CityCast Denver. If you enjoyed the show, why not take a minute to tell an unaffiliated voter about us? Rate the show wherever you get your podcasts, and subscribe to our morning newsletter and learn more about us at denver.citycast.fm. We'll be back tomorrow morning with more news from around the city. See you then.